So I don't want to waste all the time here. I want to get David Hogue on the stage. David Hogue is a PhD, applied psychologist, a leading interaction design specialist at San Francisco State University. Was the VP of Experience Design at Fluid. 20 years of experience with interaction design and user experience. So David, come on to the stage. Let's welcome David Hogue.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Before you get started,
Yes.
I have to ask you, geek or nerd?
Geek.
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 All
on
right.
the geek side.
All
Yes,
right.
I'm from New Orleans originally, and in the South, nerds just have too many negative connotations. Now I'm in the Bay Area, and geeks rule.
All right. Do you have a Mac? I think geeks have Macs, so.
I actually have a PC. I've got a Windows machine.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
All right,
yeah.
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so there's my confession for the morning. I'm a designer, and I work on a Windows machine. Yeah, there's three of us. You've met one. Okay, good morning. Thank you for having me here. It's great seeing such a great crowd. I'm here to talk to you about user experience this morning. And at this point in time, I think that user experience counts for about 1% of the population of the room. It's roughly, like there's 40 versus 4,000 kind of thing. So by the end of this hour, I hope that we're going to have a whole bunch of people who want to apply for the UX team, and that you'll be overwhelmed with applicants for this. We have a wonderful sea of blue up here. All right, so we're going to talk about user experience, and it takes a team. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about mopping. So in the mid-1990s, Procter & Gamble had seen their share of the market space around cleansers and cleaning products had really stagnated. And they needed to expand their market share. So they said, you know what? How can we make mopping more effective? And they came up with ideas, things like, well, let's adhere more dirt so that they get a cleaner clean. Or let's go ahead and we'll make a faster drying product so that people lose less time. Or how about this? Why don't we put in like Teflon into the cleaner so that when it dries, there's this non-stick surface and the floor doesn't get as dirty. They were approaching this from a better chemistry perspective. How can we make better cleaners and cleansers? And the chemistry was starting to get really, really complicated with unfortunate toxic side effects. And they weren't really very successful. Their market share didn't increase. So they said, you know what, we need to study this a little bit more. Let's go out and study how do people actually clean their houses. What do they do? And they made a few key observations. People sweep before they mop. They use multiple products from different manufacturers. They weren't loyal to Procter & Gamble. They would also wear clothes, dirty clothes, old clothes while they were mopping because it was a terrible, dirty experience. And they spent just as much time cleaning their mop as they did mopping the floor. And then they noticed some behaviors. They noticed spot cleaning. And what the researchers did, they surreptitiously would put dirt on their shoes before entering people's homes so that they would leave footprints, so that they could watch how the people cleaned the floor. And what they discovered was all these friendly little old ladies offering them lemonade and cookies and following behind them with a damp paper towel, wiping the floor. And they had their moment. And they were like, wow, spot cleaning. Eureka, we have the idea. It's all about the paper towel. Well, not quite. It was all about the paper towel on the end of a stick to facilitate spot cleaning on the floor. So the solution turned into the Swiffer product, which launched in 1999 and now generates about $500 million a year for Procter & Gamble. The point here is, and everyone wants a cleany, shine floor upon which to arrange their flowers. The point here is that it really, the problem wasn't about the chemistry. The problem was about the experience. They didn't need a better cleaner. They needed a better way of cleaning. And that's what UX people do. So, good morning. Start off with the mopping. I'm Dave Hogue. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. This contact info is up again at the end. You know about me. I'm happy to answer any other questions later. Let's get into the fun stuff. And yes, this was my favorite video game when I was a kid, Asteroids. All right. So let's start off first with just a little bit of background, and let's clarify one thing. Let's cover the issue of the problem with design. And design is in quotations here because the problem is really about the word design and not about the field of design. The word has too many meanings, which makes it difficult for us to often explain what it is that we do, because people think that design is fashion. They think that design is products. For those of you who are automotive buffs, this is the Corsair Phantom from 1938. That's a prototype car. There were 6 of them built. There's 1 left in existence. It's in the Automotive Museum in Reno, Nevada. It was fully restored just based on how they saw the car being assembled because there were no known plans for it. And then a few months ago, they discovered the original blueprints in a box in an attic in Massachusetts. So there's the Corsair Phantom. Beautiful, beautiful auto. Right. Landscape design. Interior design. It's also a word that is often conflated with art. We use the word design when we're really talking about art. Oh, I love the design of Gustav Klimt's paintings. No, you love the aesthetics of Gustav Klimt's paintings. So there is a distinction here, and of course we're in a huge battle in the web world right now around flat versus skeuomorphic, and everybody's predicting what Johnny Ive is going to do with the next iOS. But it's the way it looks that they're talking about. They're talking about aesthetics. So let's just agree from the beginning here that design is more than just appearances. We're not just talking about making interfaces that look pretty. We're talking about interfaces that solve problems, interfaces that perform functions. And if they're well designed, these are interfaces and objects that bring enjoyment to the people who use them. So, what then is user experience? And we'll get through the obligatory definitions here. You know what? I'll make that easier for you. Here's the key things. Words like experiential, effective, perceptions, utility, ease of use. That was from Wikipedia, so we've just got an open source definition there. How about we go with something a little bit more rigorous? The International Standards Organization uses words like emotions. Wait, what? ISO? Emotions? Huh? Yes, emotions. Beliefs, preferences, perceptions, physical and psychological responses, system, user, context. That's going to be an important word. And let's go to the first user experience architect ever, Don Norman, who was hired by Apple in 1993 and has become just a huge person in the community, using things like graphics, interface, physical interfaces, and interactions in the manual interactions. So UX is not actually a single discipline, hence the title of today's discussion. UX is a team effort. If you do a Google search for UX Venn diagram, lots and lots of pretty rainbow-colored images show up. But they all have a characteristic, and that is that they're trying to show us the intersection of multiple different disciplines. So we've got technology, business, and design. And I'm sorry for the small size of this, but I had to shrink it down to get it to appear here. UX is that little white area right in the center. Or they remind us that user experience has multiple facets. So we have this great prism diagram that says, information design and interaction design and content strategy and all of these things feed into what is the user experience. So let's just draw a quick analogy here. This is Joe Patient. And Joe Patient's health and well-being is not solely his responsibility and outcome. In fact, it takes a team to keep Joe Patient healthy. He's got a primary care physician whom he sees on a regular basis. If something goes wrong, he's referred to a specialist. He sees his dentist hopefully twice a year. He goes to his optometrist to get his eyes. He may see a dietitian. He may have a personal trainer. But it's the efforts of all of these people who work together as a team with Joe to help ensure that he is healthy and well. Well, Joe could also be Joe User. And the experience that he has is the result of a team effort. The business owners and the researchers, the social media team, the design team, the development team, the content team, they're all working together. They're all often working with Joe to deliver what he needs when he needs it. So then, if it takes a team to deliver UX, why are they here? Why do we have individuals who have titles called UX designer? If everyone is contributing, why do we have one person who says, this is what I do? Well, let's draw another quick analogy. This is Sigmund Freud's couch from Vienna, Austria. This is where everyone would lay down and he would analyze their dreams and dig into their psyche. As psychotherapists, we know that everyone has the ability to listen, and everyone has a degree of empathy, and everyone has this desire to help others. But if we think about it from a design perspective, we know that everyone has some contribution to user experience. But like therapists who are trained to take that one step further and be very empathetic and to be very reflective and guiding and helpful for people, UX designers are trained to ask the right questions at the right times. Why do we want people to do this? Is this something that they need? Is there another way that they can do it? So they just take it that one step further. They've got the trained eye for it, but we all still contribute. So, UX is neither unguent nor salve. I'm not sure if this is my favorite slide or not, but I like this one. The tendency for a lot of organizations and a lot of product teams is to dive in. Our temptation is to get to product as quickly as possible. So let's just dive in, let's make something, and if it's not working, we'll fix it. Or when it's not working and we can't figure out how to fix it, we'll call in a UX designer and they'll tell us how to fix it. And that's the ointment approach to UX, that you bring them in when there's something wrong. And that's not really the way that UX works, because UX really is an infusion, right? It's more like steeping good tea or something like that. UX needs to be involved and supported at the organizational level on down. So through divisions and departments, right down onto the teams themselves, integrated into the processes that we employ. So UX is something that infuses an organization, infuses a team. It is not something that we just apply as needed. And hopefully that means we've got better projects. So how valuable is UX? What does it actually bring? And how can we potentially measure that? So this is Theodore Sturgeon. He was a science fiction author. And in 1951, he had a famous revelation. You might know it as Sturgeon's Law. He actually wrote something else called Sturgeon's Law, so we're going to refer to what he called Sturgeon's revelation. He was basically asked, why is there so much schlocky science fiction out there? Remember, this is 1951, so science fiction is still an early sort of genre at the time. And he said, 90% of everything is crap. Well, the good news is you get to decide if you are in the 10%, right? So we can determine which one of those sides we are on. So what do we mean by success? If 90% of everything is crap and 10% is a success, just what is success? Well, we often hear things like, well, let's just release an awesome product. But that's a little bit difficult to measure, right? Like, where's the scale for awesomeness in product design? But there are other things that we can do. So time and money are the things that businesses are always looking at. Can we get it there faster? Can we make more money? Can we save more money? Can we save more time? So we can define success that way in terms of products. Well, so how often are we successful? Well, in this study of IT projects, the good news is that it's not actually only a 10% success rate. It's an 18% success rate. It's almost twice as high as Sturgeon said it was. The bad news is it's only 18%. 82% of the time, IT projects struggle, right? So if we take a look at the breakdown here, 32% of them, a third of IT projects, are canceled before they even launch. And the remaining 50% is split half and half between it was delivered, but it's not what I thought I was going to get, or it was delivered and I got what I wanted, but it was way late and way over budget, right? So we've only got an 18% success rate. Why? Why are we succeeding less than 1 in 5 times for these releases? Number one reason cited, lack of user input and involvement. In other words, we launched something that people were like, I don't need that. It doesn't do what I want. Number 2, incomplete requirements. And you know what? UX people are often involved in the requirements definitions of projects if they are involved at the beginning of the project, because they're the ones who talk to the users. And then number 3, unrealistic expectations. How is UX involved in this? Well, we do a lot of communication with the internal teams to make sure that everyone understands what is being designed and what is being developed, and how does that match up to the business requirements. So what about money? What is the value of user experience? So here's a quick example for you. This is actually a case study from User Interface Engineering, UIE, a famous website. So at an e-commerce website, this was the first screen of their checkout process. And the problem was that you either had to log in or create an account in order to complete your purchase. Well, they saw that there was a huge number of people that were requesting a password reset. 40%, almost half of people who came to this page said, I don't remember what my password is, reset it for me. So 40% said that. 25% of those people actually reset it, and 20% of those people actually went back and completed the transaction. So we've got this funnel that is narrowing down to a small group of people who actually ended up buying something. So do the math. It's bad, right? They were not selling nearly as much. Incidentally, this case study is called the $300 million button because they made a simple design change. They didn't force people to create an account before checking out. They said, oh, don't remember your information? You can still check out as a guest, or if you're new, you can check out as a guest. Well, 80% of the password resets disappeared in the first week. And in the first week, revenue increased by $6 million. If you extrapolate over a 50-week year, you get $300 million in increased revenue because we added a gray button that says check out as guest, right? That was it, a small change, a big experience difference. Instagram, billion-dollar photos, right? So Facebook, in the face of intense competition and who already had their own photo sharing application and service, bought Instagram for $1 billion. Partly there was some business reasons here. They didn't want anyone else to get it, but also because Instagram had done something with the user experience. Instagram had made photo sharing as simple and easy and painless and friction-free as it could possibly get. It was an experience that was worth the purchase. How about the value of time? We've been talking about selling products and delivering products. Amazon's sales decrease about 1% for every 100 milliseconds, 1/10 of a second in delay. Now, psychophysiologically speaking, if we take a look at that, 100 milliseconds is less than your reaction time threshold, and it is below your attention threshold, which means people might not even be aware that there was a 100 millisecond delay, and it has an impact on their experience. Google search traffic drops by 20%, by 1/5, if they simply have a 1/2 second delay. Second. That's like nothing, right? No. Online brokerages do at least $4 million less per millisecond after the first 5 milliseconds delay, right? This is a huge amount of money. So I know there's a huge number of software engineers in here. How many times have you asked yourself the question, how much time could you save your users? What could you do from a development perspective to just make it 100 milliseconds faster, right? And what's the value of faster access? So, who's taking design seriously? Unfortunately, I missed the trivia last night. Do you know what the image on the slide is? Thank you. Yes, Deep Thought from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And you know what the answer is, right? 42, yes, uniformly. Thank you. I tried very, very hard to make this slide 42. It's slide 41. And I was just going to put a blank slide before it just so I could say it's slide 42. All right. We can't have a discussion about design without mentioning Apple, right? The inventors of iWidgets, iThings, iDevices, etc. They also have iTunes to support their iWidgets. 52% of all mobile traffic in the United States comes through an Apple device. Just over half of all mobile traffic in the US is on a mobile device. They're sitting on about $150 billion in cash. That's a mountain of money. You don't need to count it. And they have a plan to pay out $100 billion to investors by 2015. I'd say it's a profitable company, and design, of course, is central to their process. In fact, Steve Jobs is the guy who famously said, design is not how it looks, it is how it works. And we've already redefined design for this discussion. So IDEO, you probably have heard of IDEO. It's a famous consultancy and agency that helps people generate innovative new products and services. They worked with Bank of America to create Keep the Change program to help make saving money easier and faster. Since it launched, there have been 12 million new customer accounts, and they've saved $3.1 billion since 2005. And it's a simple program, right? It's at the transaction point. If you say, yes, keep the change, it rounds up to the next nearest dollar and transfers the remaining pennies from your checking account and into your savings account. That's it. That's all it does. It's painless and friction-free. GE, you might have heard of them. They're a little company. They've been around for a while. They're building a $1 billion facility in San Ramon, California, in order to increase their innovation space. And they are hiring a kick-ass UX team to work in that building. They are competing big time with Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Apple in the Bay Area for hiring. And they've acquired some of the most talented people in the field to do it. Target, you've probably heard of Target, popular store. In 2005, Target launched the ClearRx prescription system. It's been really successful for them. They experienced double-digit annual growth in their pharmacies since then. And in 2010, they won the Industrial Design Society of America's award for Design of the Decade. So what was ClearRx? ClearRx is actually a user experience system. It's packaging for your prescriptions, but it's also information design in how the prescriptions are described to you. How do I take this? And there's a color coding system to make sure that people are taking the right medication for them. I'm green. All the green rings, all the green bottles, those are mine. I won't take anything that's not green. The story behind it actually is Deborah Adler was finishing her master's in design in about 2002 when her grandmother accidentally overdosed on her grandfather's heart medicine. She took the wrong pills because the bottles looked almost identical, the print type was too small, and the pills were similar in shape, size, and color. So she's like, there's got to be a better way, and Target bought the system from her. Philips Electronics operates what they call the home lab, in which they observe how people interact with modern technology and what are the next steps. You've probably used some of their products, audio cassettes, VCRs, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, and you're probably buying LED light bulbs, or you plan to at some point, especially because now you can change the color with your iPhone. Right? And there's a ton of startups. This could be an endless list. We'd be here forever. Two that have recently made a splash are Mailbox and Clear, because they're looking at tasks that we do all the time, right? And they're studying, where are the pain points? Where are the struggles? What's going on? And then they're designing new interactions and new workflows in order to help people do common things in better ways. So this is Jacob Pearson. He gave a talk up in Portland last year and had an awesome slide deck, but he also had this great quotation. There's tremendous business value that can be achieved by understanding how something has to work, right? In order to be usable, pleasurable, and personally meaningful. One last company that you might not think is getting design, probably the biggest data organization on earth, Google. They have a page, a Google philosophy page called 10 Things We Know to Be True. This is number 1. Focus on the user and all else will follow. The world's largest data organization has their number 1 philosophical statement that says, focus on the user. I think that says something about the value of experience. So, what do UX people do? Armored unicorns that charge in with rainbows and pixie dust and we fix everything, right? Well, sorry, it's not magic. As much as we would love to be armored unicorns, we aren't. But we do have what seems to be a magical ability to some people, and that is we seek failure, right? We want to fail at what we are doing, and there's a very important reason for it. Because we have to understand failure in order to be able to prevent it. In other words, we are failing on behalf of the users, right? Because we don't want them to have the experience. And I think that's a little bit of a magical skill. So UX is a nonlinear process. From the outside, it looks like we spend all of our time running around in circles. But we don't. What we're really doing is trying to figure out how to identify, define, frame, and solve problems over and over and over again. This is a very iterative process. But let's not talk about process. You all had a late night last night and had a lot of fun, I'm sure, and not enough coffee this morning. So let's talk about fun stuff instead. Let's shift the discussion here. Let's reframe this discussion and talk about the facets of user experience instead. So we could talk about the philosophy. How do we think? What's going on in our heads? The methods. How do we work? The artifacts. What do we produce? And the outcomes. What do we achieve? But you know what? Let's focus this even more and just talk about the interesting bit. Let's get inside the head of a UX designer to understand how we think. You've got an exceptionally talented team here. They would be happy at any time to talk to you about their methods, their artifacts, and how they measure their outcomes. But it's a lot more interesting to get inside a designer's head to see what's going on. The acclaim and the applause from above is just wonderful. So, UX philosophy. Let's focus on the UX philosophy. How we think is what makes us unique. How we think is what we bring to the team. So we're going to talk about a few topic areas here. How do we understand the perspectives in the context? How do we understand the users? How do we understand the tasks and what they're trying to do? Why are we the only ones responsible for being creative and innovative? We're going to debunk that myth. Talking about people versus machines, because we are the advocate for the user. And then we'll wrap up with future thinking. Right? We love our crystal balls. What's coming up next? So, diving in. Number one, perspectives and context. We try to look at problems from every possible different direction. How does it look, not just from my perspective and the lens of my own experience or from the business requirements, but from every person out there who's going to use it? So we're worried about things like scale. How big is this problem, right? Let's not get bogged down in a discussion of whether or not the button should be yellow or orange. The real question is, do we have to have the button? Right? That's a scale issue. And along with that goes fidelity, right? How much detail? What level are we talking about? I really like to say that UX designers are really, really good altitude changers. We have to be able to instantly go up to 30,000 feet and see the big picture, and then dive right back down to 10 feet and get into the details. Just mire ourselves into details, and then zoom right back up and take a look at the big picture again. Time. We take a look at problems from the perspective of what have people learned and done in the past, what's their prior experience, what is their current need, and how can we anticipate what they will need in the future. And context. This is a really important one. Who are the people that are going to use this? What is the situation in which it will be used? What is their need? How important is it to them to resolve this need or achieve this need at that time? And is it an urgent need? Is there a time pressure involved? So things can be casual or urgent, have a little bit of time or a lot of time. I have to do it right now. I can come back and finish it tomorrow. Understanding context is essential. This is what's called a customer journey or a journey map, and it's one of the artifacts that we produce to help us understand the context of a user experience. Number two, psychology. How do we understand the people? What's going on inside the head of the user? And from this, there are 5 things that we talk about in the psychology realm. We talk about the motivation, what is driving people. We talk about the cognition, how do they think and learn and remember it. The emotional experience, was it good or was it bad? The behavior, how do they react and interact with it? And then creativity and play. Do they feel as if they have been a participant in the process? Do they feel as if they have ownership in the experience? And if yes, they are more satisfied, more engaged, and more invested in that. Here's a quick reminder. You are not designing for yourself. So the next time you say, I like it over here better, you need to get rid of the I part of that question, right? The word about there's no I in team, yeah, but there is an M and an E, and that spells me. But that's not the focus. You're not designing for yourself. We need to be user-centered in our approach. Can everyone hear okay, just to make sure? All right, good. 'Cause I'm like, wow, rain. We don't get it like this in California. So let's just dive in and talk a little bit about a few of the key areas here. So motivation. Motivation is defined as the force that initiates, sustains, and directs behavior, right? So what is the person's need? What do they have to achieve or accomplish at this point? What's the end goal? Where are they trying to get to? What is driving them? What is moving them forward? Do they know they even have a need? Now that's a really important question because people don't always know that they are struggling with something. They don't always know that they could do something in a better, easier, faster, more efficient way. They just do it out of habit. And user experience designers often look at what they are doing and find the places where people are slower or more error-prone than they should be, and then we try to fix that. Did you know you needed these? Right. Apple knew you needed them, but you may not have known you needed them. So cognition, these are our mental processes. This is what we are thinking about. This is the information in your consciousness, right? So we talk about things like attention, learning and memory, language, how we communicate, reasoning and problem-solving skills, decision-making skills. All of these are things that we study from a cognitive psychology perspective. Unfortunately, our ability to solve problems, our cognition is not perfect. It is error-prone. There are what are called cognitive biases, and it exposes our fallibility. So there are lots and lots of cognitive biases, dozens of them that have been identified and studied. We'll talk about the first 2 here, framing and anchoring. So, first off, because our cognition is infallible, or is not infallible, get that right, there are potentially terrible consequences. So you may recognize this image, you may recognize this person. This is Edward Tufte. And in 1986, after the Space Challenger exploded at takeoff, or after takeoff, within a few seconds after takeoff, he took a look at the data charts that the NASA engineers had used to determine whether or not it was safe to agree to launch Challenger on a very cold morning. And he replotted the data, and he reframed the question. And he said, you know, if you had looked at the data the correct way, you would have realized that there was a greater than 80% chance that fatal damage would have occurred to the O-rings if you launched that morning. You did launch that morning, and 7 people died, and we lost a space shuttle. And it was all about understanding how people looked at the data and how it affected their decision-making. In fact, it was a great example of what's called framing. The way we show the data, the way we ask the question influences the solutions and the answers that we generate. So, context and framing, that influences us. So here's a question. When we're designing a new healthcare product, should the goal be reduce deaths, or should it be maximize quality of life? 2 different questions. Probably 2 different very product outcomes. And it's only because of the way we worded it, nothing else. Anchoring is another cognitive bias that is very common. It's our tendency to rely too heavily on our starting point. We tend to not move very far from where we begin when we're problem solving. And a good example of that, what did the first cars look like? Horse carriages, because that's what people were driving around before there were engines. And in case you didn't realize, this is actually the world's first electric auto. This is not an internal combustion vehicle. Cognitive load is something else that we're concerned about. Memory and attention are limited resources. We need to use them wisely. And when we say that cognitive friction has occurred, it means that we're forcing people to think harder, to problem solve harder, to remember things with more effort than they really need to. So the great thing, really, about computers is that we have the ability to give people what they need when they need it. The other great thing about computers is that they don't care how hard they work, right? They're not sentient yet, so we can let them do all the work. Why should we force people to think when we can use up the billions of cycles per second that computers are just wasting while they wait for us to futz our way through a decision? Right? Designing for emotion. Don Norman wrote this book, Emotional Design. You may know he also wrote a book called, it was originally called The Psychology of Design, in which he basically was arguing that form and function were very important, things needed to work well, blah, blah, blah. About 10 years after the publication of that book, he had learned through his own research and through the research of others that emotions are actually really, really important to the perceptions of our experiences, and that we are highly emotional creatures. Daniel Kahneman estimates that we've got 20,000 emotional experiences per day. Right? And interestingly, we believe that attractive things work better. And the classic study was giving people two tools that do exactly the same thing, one of which was designed to be attractive, one of which was just basic form functional design. People used the two tools and they uniformly thought that the pretty one worked better, even though they both worked with the same efficiency and accuracy. Android, once again, Google, the data company. They have 3 UX design principles: enchant me, simplify my life, and make me amazing. And at the core of this is emotion. In fact, there are several studies that they cite in the development of these design principles. And they've made it central to their entire design process. So some of this research. Gottman, 2004. This guy's amazing. So he watches people who are newlywed interact for 15 minutes, and he can predict if they're going to stay married or be divorced with 94% accuracy, simply by observing and counting the number of positive and negative emotional experiences that they have. And when the ratio is 5-to-1 or better, 5-to-1 good to bad or better, they stay married. But as that ratio approaches 1-to-1, they end up being divorced. Lasada, 1999, found that work groups with positive emotional interactions are more productive. When the positive interactions are 3-to-1 or greater, outnumbering the negative ones, the groups themselves are more productive. Emotion, yes, very important. Fredrickson, more recently in 2009, discovered that for every negative experience we have, we need 3 positive experiences in order to pull ourselves out of that pit of despair and overcome them. 3-to-1. Negative emotional experiences have a huge impact on us, right? The marketing people probably know that intuitively because they know that negative experiences are the things people scream about. They don't go talking about the positive ones, right? So 3-to-1. Have you ever said, it's easy to use, it's not so easy to use, but it works. Let's just go ahead and get it out there. People can still do what they need to do. Well, follow that up with, is the rest of your product 3 times better in order to make up for that one meh? That's a big hurdle to cross. Common sense is neither. Okay, so another thing that we know from psychology is that what people think to be true is not always true. In fact, if we made good decisions with little or no data, we probably wouldn't smoke, drink, or gamble. We know that they're bad for us, right? But people still do it. Our minds, they lead us into believing things that are not necessarily true or that we think we know more than we really do. So we need to use more objective data in order to inform our decisions. User experience is not driven by hunches, it is driven by data. So the myth of mobile, here's a good one where you think your common sense knows what's going on. How and where do people use their smartphones? Now, most of you have probably heard this by now, but it's not when you're running to catch the train to go to work because you've got to make an emergency phone call. You actually use your phone, about 80% of mobile device usage happens in the house, and 70% of what we are doing is basically socializing, playing games, and looking for information. We're not even using our communication devices for communication most of the time. And a whole series of studies find that that number, it varies a bit, somewhere between 64 and 79%, but roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of what we do is just play, right? We're just playing around. So think about how you use your own mobile device. You're on the couch, you're seeing something on television, a question comes up, your laptop's in the next room, your phone is in your pocket. Where do you Google the answer? Yeah, your couch potato butt stays exactly where it is and the phone comes out and you get your answer. Even though you probably would have a better visual experience if you went to the laptop in the next room. Task analysis, another thing that we do. We take apart everything that people are trying to accomplish. We break it down into smaller and smaller bits to understand step by step what has to happen. We disassemble everything. We relish in taking things apart. And hopefully we're good at putting them back together again in a better form. I think that was a Yugo, and when you reassemble it, you get a BMW 3 Series. This is BJ Fogg. He's a psychologist at Stanford and Palo Alto. Some of you may recognize his name because in the early 2000s, he was the guy that started the Web Credibility Project to study and understand why do people trust things on the website. He has since shifted his professional focus into behavior modification, actually. And the technique that he uses is technically called sub-goal decomposition. That is, we break down large goals into smaller, more manageable steps, or sub-goals, and we tackle them one small sub-goal at a time. This is really commonly used when we're trying to solve complex problems, or, like I said, in behavior modification programs that he calls tiny habits. Another way that we disassemble things is the application of what's called the theory of constraints. Oftentimes when we're faced with a huge list of problems, we step back and we try to rank order and prioritize them. Which are the worst? Which are the most severe? Which are the largest? And then we start with the biggest and we begin to work our way down the list. The reason that we do this, that we work our way down, is because resolving larger issues often resolves smaller problems along with it. Because many problems share common causes, and by solving the big ones, we also happily solve some of the small ones. Toyota uses a technique called 5 whys. They encourage their workers to ask why at least 5 times to reveal what they call the root cause of a problem. So we could think of that in a healthcare setting. Why was the wrong drug administered? Because the patient drug chart was not complete. Why was the patient drug chart not complete? Because the day's new prescriptions did not yet appear in the system. Why did the day's new prescriptions not yet appear in the system? Because the physicians can only enter it from the hospital pharmacy. Why can they only enter it from the hospital pharmacy? Because the pharmacy is responsible for ensuring that there are no drug interactions. Why then, if the pharmacy is at the seat of this, are they the bottleneck in getting new drugs onto the list? Well, the solution could be having 2 lists on the patient's drug chart, currently administered and pending, so that the physician in the room with the patient now sees drugs they may be receiving later this afternoon and therefore not give them the wrong thing right now. But it took us 4 or 5 questions in order to come to a design solution. We also use mental models to understand how people think. I'll go through this one quickly for y'all. There are 3 types of models that we use. There are mental models. In The Wizard of Oz, these 4 characters had a mental image of who the wizard was. A large, beneficent, happy man who would give them everything that they needed and send Dorothy back to Kansas. The wizard, on the other hand, had designed a different experience for people. A large and foreboding being who people would have to cower to. Therefore, they wouldn't ask for things that he couldn't deliver. Right? But how it really worked was a little old man behind a curtain off to the side of the room. So the mental model is how the user thinks something should work. The conceptual model is how we as the product team design it to work. And the system model is how it really works behind the scenes, right? Everything that's happening in the code and on the servers and the data models and the transactions and all of that stuff, the users never ever see that, right? We try to conceal the system model, and we try to make sure that the conceptual model and the mental model are the same. Because when they are the same, the experience is what we would call intuitive. When users ask why, we have a problem. If the user says, "Why am I not done yet? Why does this work this way? Why is that over there?" We have distracted them from their task at hand. They're no longer focused on what they're trying to do. They're now trying to figure out why you're making them do it that way. Right? We should never put them into a situation where they're asking, why is this like this? We need to be able to design around that. Number 4, creativity. So here we're going to try and debunk this one. Why is the design team always the team that seems to be challenged with, come up with a brand new innovative solution? Well, it's also one of the most difficult things for us to define from a psychological perspective, just what is creativity? But the good news is everyone has it. It's not the purview of a single role on your team. So there are a couple ways that we can measure it or discuss it. We can talk about divergent thinking, abductive reasoning, and actions, images, and symbols. So we'll quickly address each of these. So divergent thinking is when you try to come up with as many possible solutions for a single problem. What are all of the different ways we could explain this? What are all of the different ways that we could accomplish this? We then pick the best of those solutions and we pursue them. And divergent thinking is psychologically associated with creativity, the ability to generate multiple solutions, multiple ideas. This is opposed to convergent thinking, which is the belief that there's only one potential solution that is the best and I'm trying to find it. Divergent thinkers say there's multiple answers, let's come up with as many as we can, and then we'll find the best of that set. A designer is someone who, if they were working with a jigsaw puzzle, may be inclined to disassemble it, shuffle all the pieces around, and try it again, because, there just might be another picture in there. Abductive reasoning. This is a process where we observe and we gather data. Then we try to explain the data that we have collected. We generate as many possible solutions as we can. We select the best of these. We go back, we design something around them, and then we try to test it. We gather data and analyze whether or not they've been effective, and then we repeat. Remember I said from the outside it looks like UX designers run around in circles? Well, it's because everything we do is really iterative. It's just repeating process. Does this look familiar? If you've ever been in a design war room, the wall, Post-its? Yes. Many times this is because we are coming up with all of the paths and all of the possibilities and all of the plausible solutions. This is Jacques Hadamard. He was a famous mathematician in the early 20th century, and he surveyed 100 of the best mathematicians and scientists of the time. Well, actually 99. He included himself in that list because he thought he was one of the best. And he asked them, how do you work? How do you achieve your accomplishments? And then he looked at their answers, and this was just an open-ended question, and they sent back essays to him. He read all of them, and he realized that people really talked about their work in 3 different styles. There were people who worked by doing, by moving things around. Albert Einstein was famous for walking and thinking, for not being at a blackboard, for not writing, but by literally being physically active. There were people who drew pictures and doodles. Richard Feynman invented the Feynman diagram because he needed a better way to represent his problems. He doodled it out and realized that he had developed a communication system. And then we have more formalized symbols. And what he discovered in the responses from the mathematicians was that very few, a very small percentage, actually work in the symbols in the language of mathematics. The vast majority of them said, I do things or I doodle things, right? In fact, 30%, about a third of people said, I work, I do things. So, an important point here, UX design deliverables are symbols. They are communication devices. They are how we communicate our ideas. They are not how we work. A wireframe is not what we do. A wireframe is merely what we say. Our process, our work is really in the observing, the measuring, the thinking, the sketching, the exploring, the trying, and even in the seeking of the failure. So number 5, we're always on the lookout for people versus machines, right? We're the user advocate. This, by the way, is the Hammond typewriter, and you gotta love the ergonomics on that thing. Space is that little one right in the middle. Actually, point, there you go. That's the space bar. Okay. Easy to use, right? Well, the problem is that we should never force people to conform to the machine or to the system. We should always strive to make the machine conform to the person. Where is the burden here, right? And I'm not talking about the guy wearing the 50-pound helmet. I'm talking about the guy behind him who has to operate the machine. For whom was this designed? Right? Have you ever said, let's just make it a setting. We'll put it in preferences. Okay. Well, you know what? That is pushing decision-making back onto the user. That is causing cognitive friction and increasing cognitive load. And if we take a look at how effective that is, well, it isn't. 13 million US Facebook people have never changed a privacy setting, but everyone screams about privacy. 5% or less of software users actually change the preferences. They use their software as it is installed. Right? So making it a setting just pushes things back. This is look, there's room. Let's put a button there. Right? No. Just no. Right? Let's have a reason to do this. When there's open space and you want to cram stuff into it, it's called horror vacui. In Latin, it means fear of empty space, right? Just no. Minimalism. Let's just take everything out, right? We'll go the other direction. This is Budokan restaurant in New York. This is their homepage, which at least it gives me their address, but I then have to launch a full-screen flash site that opens in another browser window, and then I have to dig around and look for their actual hours and whether or not I can find a menu and make a reservation online. So, clean and elegant code and simple interfaces, admirable goals, but not if we're doing it at the cost of the user experience, not if we are pushing things back onto the user. So, I know, I would love to be able to stand up here and say UX always wins, but I realize there is compromise. There are technological constraints. There are business constraints around time and cost. There are partner constraints, lots of things. It really is about finding that balance and knowing which battles to fight and how to compromise in order to deliver the best experience within the constraints we have. Last thing, future thinking. So, UX designers are really good at trying to foresee what will happen. And in particular, we really like to try and figure out how people are going to do the wrong thing at the wrong time and break it in ways that we haven't anticipated. I like to say to my team that I'm their next best idiot because chances are, when they ask me to take a look at something, I am going to do or ask the one thing they have not yet designed for, right? I'm going to look for how can I make it fail, because that's what we need to focus on. Once we've prevented the failures, we can come back and refine and nuance the experience. This is Alan Kay. You probably know who he is. If you've ever used a windowed user interface, you can thank and clap for him. He famously said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So that's our goal, right? So, quick review here. We're just about finished. So, it's UX thinking. It's what's going on inside our head that makes us unique. It's how we look at perspectives and context. Just what is the situation? It's how do we understand the people, the users? What are they really trying to do, and how are they getting there? How can we come up with new solutions to old or common problems? Are we designing for the person, or are we designing for the simplicity of the code? Now, room full of engineers, this is going to be dangerous here, but I would rather ask you to spend 100 hours and write 100,000 lines of code more to deliver a better experience for the end user than to have you say, ugh, really? Let's just put the button over there. Future thinking. Where are we headed? So UX is a ladder, right? We're trying to climb this ladder. At the bottom, we're focused just on tasks. Let's just get it done. But the higher we go, the more we start getting into things like pleasure and meaningfulness. We want to see how high up that ladder we can climb. And we do have a minimum bar for ourselves. We've got to get at least halfway up, because that's where mental models and conceptual models converge. If we don't get to the halfway point, we're delivering crap. We've put ourselves in the 90%. So how do we integrate user experience into our process, into our teams, into our company? Have I got a solution for you? Prabo Solve, under $1,000 a month, fixes everything, right? No, seriously. UX needs top-down support. We need organizations such as these who understand the value of design and who advocate for design and make sure that we get the resources for design. We have to implement it into our processes. We have to make sure that we are involved from the start, that we are not the ointment or the salve that's brought in because there's a rash on the project. Not after the requirements, not after the research, not just to make it pretty, and definitely not to fix everything that is broken, right? We want to be there from the start. And we need to be on the team, right? It takes a team. Back to this diagram. Everyone is contributing. User experience is the end result of the team, not one person on that team. So we need to include each other in everything that we do, because you never know where the next great idea is going to come from. Everyone is creative, not just the designers. So if we take a look at the creativity cycle, we can adapt this. This is an iterative cycle. How do we come up with new ideas? How do we generate innovative products? Well, that's really what we do for user experience. How do we come up with new solutions and generate innovative new solutions? Right? So we have the UX cycle, and it is an iterative cycle. And there are little things in here that we do that are iterative, right? So where are people having problems? How can we define it? What are the possible solutions? Let's design that out. Let's test it. Let's give it a try and optimize. Let's launch that product. We're not quite perfect, so let's watch how people use the product and find where they have problems and come up with solutions to those problems. And we repeat this. In fact, if we take a look at this, we can put on some overlays and say the top half of that circle is all about identifying and defining problems. The bottom half of that circle is all about creating solutions. Or we could say, if we divide it up a different way, the right side of that circle is all about generating ideas. The left side of that circle is all about delivering products and solutions. So here's just a really, really quick story for you about an organization that got UX just a little bit later than they should have. So money is a big data problem, right? Big data is all about analyzing the data, helping people find meaning, and then making the data actionable. How can I use that? So financial services, insurance companies, healthcare, social networks, web traffic, military, logistics, everything. They're all concerned with how do I make data meaningful and actionable. If we take a look at the banking space, for years and years and years, banks were simply responsible for doing your transactions. Cash the check, manage the deposit, remind me to pay my mortgage. It was up to me to figure out what to do with my money, and I might have Quicken or spreadsheets or Post-its or whatever to do that. So banking provided people with access to their information, but it was not known for its ability to guide people toward better financial decisions. And there was a huge opportunity, and startups like Mint.com and Wasabi and Personal Wallet, they saw this opportunity, and they began to deliver experiences online. This is Web 2.0 era, can you tell? Everything's all glossy and candy-colored. That helped them make better financial decisions. And the banks understood what was going on, and they realized this is competition. Wells Fargo saw this competition, and they needed to deliver new experiences to their customers in order to remain in that space. They actually altered their business model. They reorganized at the highest levels to create a customer experience unit that was responsible for being the gateway to every consumer-facing experience on any device through any channel, right? Not just that they put people on the teams, but that every project came through that division organizationally. The CX division approves everything before it gets launched to the public. They built out a huge UX team, and they delivered. They delivered a product that was doing what Mint.com did in a more integrated, more informative way because they had access to more of the consumer data, right? Mint.com didn't have all your data, but the bank probably had more of it. And so they were able to succeed. All right, thank you. It was awesome talking with you all today. Sorry we ran over a few minutes late. Have fun. There's some great sessions that are coming up.